Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 5 of An Embodied Woman Unleashed. The guest speakers today, I'm so excited about Bhāvan Maki and Yemaya. And these women are just phenomenal women. Bhavani, I've known both of them for such a long time. And Bhavani was one of my instrumental first, really profound teachers of my life. And I found her when I was 23. I had just returned to the island after living overseas for a long time. And I started my yoga journey with her, and it changed my entire life. And so welcome, Bhavani. I'm so happy to have you here.
It's really a pleasure. I mean, we've grown up together, right?
Yeah.
Mother Yoga's raised us.
Totally. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. And then Yemaya, I met you, gosh, probably 20 years ago too. And your beautiful French accent and your just beautiful vibrancy. And we're both body workers. And yeah, it's just been such a pleasure to watch our life journeys as well. And you do really profound work. So welcome to the call as well. Thank you, Maya, for being here. So I'd love to just hand it over to both of the women to introduce themselves and to really share their work in the world and their gifts and their genius. So Bhavani, would you like to start us off? Share with what you do?
Sure. I would say, so my name's Bhāvan Maki, and I've been teaching yoga for almost 30 years. I was introduced to yoga at age 9. And for me, yoga has gone through many iterations. Certainly when you guys met me, I was really in my younger years. And so it was more of a kinetic form, but at the heart of it was really a longing. And it's so clearly, affirmed in the Yoga Sutras. I integrate the Yoga Sutras because so much of yoga is really misdirected and practiced without the sutra. They were always meant to be together. So the Yoga Sutras speak about the psychology and how we use somatics to leverage our internal healing. And it describes yoga. He uses the word samadhi, which is often interpreted as super consciousness or enlightenment. But, being a student of Sanskrit and really looking at the deeper etymology, samadhi means reclaiming your wholeness. And knowing that our wholeness is there, despite the fact that there's splinters and there's fractures, and, knowing that our wholeness is intact, and that part of our wholeness is this deep inner longing for something, for authenticity, and something even more primal, which is intimacy. And so to me, yoga is about gaining intimacy with the many strata of ourselves. And then, it's a multidisciplinary kind of a practice. So there's self-reflection. We can do study to develop our intellect. We can do physical practices. Patanjali also was the patron of dance, which I know Yemaya is just such a beautiful, wholehearted dancer. I'm so moved by your presence. So, bringing in dance, bringing all of that, but then also, definitely, I believe a really important part of the healing is the therapeutics, as far as the therapeutic counseling with somebody who's really worked in trauma release. So the way that I appreciate yoga is that we take the imprints of trauma and we're able to metabolize them. Bottom to top therapy is through movement. Top to bottom therapy is talking it out with somebody who's, really skilled, usually licensed in that field. And by doing that, we can return the imprint of trauma back to pure prana.
Love it. Oh, you are just such a wealth of knowledge. You just always amaze me. And you've written a book and you've done so much. So thank you so much, Bhavani.
It's all a product of the deep, deep wounds. I didn't have a choice. I didn't. Yoga saved my life, and it's been my vehicle, so that's where it comes from.
Thank you. Okay, more to find out from you in a moment. All right, Yemaya, could you please introduce your genius and what you do in the world?
Thank you. Well, I love the weaving that we have. I think all of us here on the call today. Yeah, same. So my path started with my own needs, and it started with dance. Dance as medicine. Moving the trauma, out of the body through freeing the body, and meditation, and then at some point, all my childhood stuff, got very apparent. And I started studying the Rosen method body work in my late 20s in Berkeley, which is, Marianne Rosen was one of the pioneers of the somatic movement. And the work was, very physical, like hands-on and verbal, to help move the childhood trauma and memories that the body holds by, using muscle group tensions. So very much hands-on. And, over the 30 years of practicing and having had the chance to be with Marianne for almost 8 years when I was younger, I realized a few years ago that, let's say my practice was open to everybody. People would come with all kind of, acute physical pain or, childhood trauma, depression. And then I realized, I looked at those 30 years and going, okay, I'm really dealing with childhood adversity recovery here. And so I've been focusing these last 3 years to create programs that will help people move out of that, the consistent return to wounding that the muscle and the mind are bringing us back, or the samskaras, right? Those pathways in the brain that we keep running over until we really manage to heal with the somatic aspects of, all this beautiful, yoga therapy and, dance and somatic body work. And I also realize that a lot of the root, of our issues is also surrounding grief and abandonment, sometimes abandonment from source. And that's also another thing I really focus, helping people find their way back to trust and grace in something higher.
Oh, I love you women so much. Okay, so I'd love to start off this conversation, if you would be so bold to share a little bit of your personal journey of what are some of the main imprints that you got from your upbringing, wherever you were in the world, and with the parents that you had or caregivers, and your culture, about what it was to be a woman, what you were taught, told, showed. What are some of those imprints? So who would like to go first?
Bhavani?
Well, I'm first generation American, so I wasn't raised in an American household. My mother's a Northern European, she's Scandinavian, and in Finland actually was one of the first countries in which women, I think it was the first country in Europe in which women got the vote. So women are very empowered. There's, just lots of support for childcare, etc. And that was her world, my mother's world. So they're more liberated. And then in contrast, my father is Greek, he's Mediterranean. And in my own childhood, there was the dowry system. So there was a lot of conflict there. It was very challenging. My father was molested by his mother growing up. Part of that was because she was divorced. So at that point in that culture, a woman was damaged goods. So she molested him. He had a lot of resentment towards women. And he was also very typical of people who've been molested, highly sexualized. Mm-hmm. So I was molested by him growing up, and his mother, both of them. And, his pet names for me were my little cunt, my little whore. That's what I grew up with. And it was very, very painful. In contrast, I had a mother who sat there with a hand mirror saying, this is your vagina. Isn't it beautiful? You know? So it was a very, very stark kind of a difference growing up in that way. And then growing up in the late 60s and the early 70s, there was this kind of a revolution. So I had this intense contrast. And really interestingly, also, I was the second child. I was the second daughter. And that was a big disappointment. I should have been a boy. So I remember like in kindergarten, putting on these shows for the family where I cut out a paper penis and literally hung it at my hips. I changed my name from Sylvia to Sylvester. And I would sing like a male opera singer. It was just very clear to me that as a male, I had more choices, that there was more available to me. So it was a really, really painful growing up in that way. And yet, like, there was something deep within me that knew it was almost like I had been born into this experiment, but I had like this deep soul calling. And as I mentioned, I was really lucky at 9 years old to be introduced to yoga, and then being very I was always kind of like playing on the edge and things like that. So I was a musician, and I had a fake ID in high school. I used to sing at this bar, and I started dating the bartender who was working on his doctorate. And he said, you're really sweet and it's fun, but you should be with a guy who's your age. And he gave me a copy of the Bhagavad Gita, which he was writing his dissertation on. And I read that and I learned all those terms like samskara. These are the neural ruts. This is the inherited trauma. This is the illusion, about, the projections that were put onto you as far as who you should be and what is considered acceptable or not acceptable. And so that just like, it was like, I knew it to be true. And I really, yoga has been so wonderful for me in that way, in forging my own path to authenticity and reclaiming, my sacredness, and even being able to take those experiences and realize that they've informed me. Because when you're doing trauma release, as I'm sure you both know, people know without you even saying. They can feel it through your vagal tone, through the space that you hold. If you've sorted through this stuff, and the trauma never, like those experiences never go away, but your relationship changes to it. And it's very beautiful, but it's been a long journey. I was afraid to even share those things initially, because how are people going to see me if they know that happened, and rape and all of those things? But now I feel like, I'm a different animal. There's so much to discover, and it's really been a wonderful gift, because what I share is my own path of healing and discovery, and really just being like, you can do this, and there's nothing that's too difficult or too painful to be touched, and there's a timing for things.
Mm. Wow, Bhavani, I didn't even know these things about you. So
Yeah.
okay. It's like coming together. It's making sense. That militantness that you had, I'm like, all right. Thank you for sharing that. Yemaya, can you share a little bit about your younger journey?
So, I was born in France, obviously, I guess, but I was raised by a single dad. So I had, the image of the feminine, for me, it was a woman escaping, down by the back door because my father was very violent, a woman that was hiding, the woman who disappeared for a year. So that was my relationship to the feminine, to the mother. So so that I experienced the abandonment from the mother, and then the violence from the masculine, sorry. But in the same time, my dad made me his little princess. So it was a lot of mixed messages there. It's like, he never remarried. He made me his little wife, and then the French culture, known as liberal, I guess, around our sexuality or sensuality. That's true, but it's hidden, right? It's like, it's the beautiful new woman, walking down the street with her high heels, but it's, having affairs, possibly. It's not the real freedom that I discovered later on, moving to California, going into 5 rhythm dance, and coming back to France, going to a nightclub with my cousins, and having people looking at me dancing, going like, oh my God, what is she doing? Because there was freedom in my body. So a little bit, different, the background, and then moving to the States at 21. I believe that's what gave me a desire to learn about goddess tradition, and the Earth Mother was really like a big thing for me, like really studying spirituality and the goddesses. And yes, the earth is my body. I'm the body of the earth was really deep, important teaching for me to embrace. But then I went back and forth to, went to the Zen center, and learned patriarchal structure. And then I went to plant medicine, and it's all womanly thing. And then ashrams and, the Hindu Baba Haridas, which I know Bhavani knew as well. So I feel like in my desire to liberate women from the shackle of the past, there is also a strong desire to empower the sacred masculine, because that's the only way we're gonna make a difference, I believe. So just really touched by what's happening with the Iranian woman, for example, at the moment. And as I was reflecting on today, I really wanted to say something about how do we empower the sacred masculine, not the authoritarian masculine. Excuse my French, my stumbles.
Yeah, incredible. I just went to the little support rally that we had here on Island on Saturday, and Shadeen was on she was a guest speaker too last week. So she brought some of her journey and her connection there, and it's a really powerful time. It's heartbreaking what's happening there, and it's really exciting. It's like both hard and very exciting. And it makes me even more passionate about doing this work, and how brave and how much gratitude I have for having the freedoms to even do this work. Because in that country, I probably would be killed along with us. So yeah, thank you, Yemaya. So I am curious, Bhavani, how your evolution, your medicine, yoga being your medicine, how that helped you kind of through the conditioning and the dichotomy that you were experiencing in your childhood. I'm curious how that was yourself.
It was a somatic knowing, which is really the way that I believe that the soul speaks, and learning to trust in our body and things like that. So there was a lot of physical abuse also in my house growing up. And as my sister poignantly put it to me, which was shattering, and also like they say, the truth will set you free, but first it'll make you damn mad, was that I was the dog that everybody kicked in the house. So, she suffered as well, having to watch that I was always the one who was strangled and beaten, etc. So I just remember going to this class, and, back in the 70s, there weren't all of these. It wasn't an industry. Yoga wasn't an industry, and it wasn't branded. So I imagine it was maybe why can't I even think about it, but like a Satchitananda or something like that. And we just did very simple practices. They weren't all these, butterfly mermaid pose. It was like you did, Baddha Konasana, Uttanasana, Sarvangasana, very standard poses. And I just remember having this light bulb moment, which is what Patanjali describes yoga. It's like, opening for transmission, right? We become so, we have to become so guarded and shielded because we don't know, you're just trying to survive your surroundings, and whether it's something as intense and concentrated as in my family, or it's an underlying current in culture and society where misogyny has been rampant. I mean, it's ubiquitous in so many cultures, right? The ideas about a woman. But literally every cell in my body, I was like, I'm safe. And I don't think I'd ever felt that way in my entire life. And maybe I even went to another class, I don't know. But from that day on, I was like, I had this feeling like, I'm going to do this for the rest of my life. And I'm coming home to myself. So a lot of it was really a personal journey of just inhabiting my body again. And in the vinyasa tradition comes from nyasa, which is a practice in which you take, and yoga, by the way, has been hijacked as far as I'm concerned. Not just I'm concerned, but it's been hijacked, because it's lucrative. But even before that, it's been hijacked by monastic traditions. The sacred feminine wasn't honored. We can see this polarization. And I so appreciate what you said, Yemaya. We have to lift the men up as well as the women, So nyasa was a tradition where you took sandalwood paste and mantras, and you consecrated your body as holy. So to me, yoga is feeding the holy, which means your wholeness. And so much of yoga is about transmission. Like, where am I numb? Where am I blocked? Where am I hemorrhaging energy? So working on a really somatic level. Also, I've worked with a lot of plant medicines, I would say, since being a sophomore year in high school. And I really, using, to me, yoga is it's an indigenous tradition. And so using these medicines and feeling like, feeling the transmission in my body in tandem with a lot of dance initially on psychedelics, that was really important, like just unwinding stuff in my body, music, and then lots and lots of psychotherapy. I really think that, yoga is about having intimacy with yourself, and our capacity for intimacy with others depends on our intimacy with ourselves. And it's like Oscar Wilde said, anybody who thinks they know who they are must be shallow. So it's like so exciting to discover parts of yourself. And then yoga to me means communion. So like the more I'm in touch with myself, the more I can let go. Like there's time, boundaries are healthy. You need boundaries to create accountability, but also that there's some elasticity there, and that you people of resonance come into your field. And in that communion, there's magic, there's mystery. So to me, it's really been a mystical path. It comes under the heading of yoga, but it's really a path to the heart and a path of our wholeness.
I imagine that yoga for you at that stage of your life was like a safe place for you to be in and to feel safe in your body, when I'm imagining that you didn't get to experience that in your home life.
It really was. And then, I remember I was arduous because, again, I was chasing my wholeness, and there's more to that story. I was hit by a car and I was in pain. So now I really had to dig into the practice, the physical practice. I was more into the philosophy for a long time, and I didn't want to go to a chiropractor all the time. So then it became more like, all right, I need to take on a practice. And my teacher was leaving the island. And when she left, she said, don't worry, I'm not going to leave you without a teacher. Bhavani's going to take over. And I freaked out. I was like, I'm not ready. I told her, and she said, you're right. You're not ready, but you're the one, because you're the one, you're hungry. You know, it was like my lifeline. And so then I was like, oh my God, I really need to study. And then that sent me to Mysore. And then I just kind of got swept up into this very patriarchal kind of a system. That's when you knew me. And it was like, you know, militant and whatnot. And there was benefit to that. But then it started to close me off. And it wasn't till I met my teacher, Ramajyoti Vernon, who brought yoga in through the lens of the feminine. And she always spoke about yoga practices, the way that they're taught, as being constrictive, all the heat, all the pushing, the speed. And she said, yoga is a state of dilation. And essentially you're giving birth to yourself and you're birthing that creativity. So my approach has really shifted where, yeah, I was doing vinyasa and it was breath-based. It was kind of like with this goal of meeting this standard that came from the outside. Now it's about like feeling the breath move through me and feeling the level of transmission and holding holy space. And so really, more than being a teacher, I'm a student, you know. I'm just it lights me up.
And there's nothing more precious to me than a teacher being humble enough to also see themselves as a student, like, because we're just such the students of life, of our practices, of what we do, and life is always shifting and changing. Our bodies are shifting and changing, our emotional states, the things that come our way. So it's always a new moment, a new challenge, and a new breakthrough happening.
You know,
Powerful.
without that desire, without that curiosity, I mean, in our natural state, we're curious, we're creative, we're calm, we're connected. You know, these are our natural states. And this is what keeps us juicy, you know, and you can tell when somebody, maybe they have the chops, maybe they have the, you know, the street cred and whatnot, but you can tell by their nature, it's like, you know, there's a deep knowing, there's a resonance, you know, it's like when you sit with somebody like Yemaya, the way that you emanate. I mean, I see it through your Instagram posts, and you too, Ashley. It's like, it's coming from your heart. It's coming from your pelvic floor. You know, it's not just up here, and it's not just, you know, social media pretty, but it's like you don't have a choice, because otherwise you would just close off and die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Yemaya, what you shared before about going and being in 5 rhythms and, like, you know, really getting that freedom and permission and that connection and that authenticity of how you're moving and freeing. And I've done a lot of that work myself. And I too was a dancer when I was younger. But I would say for my own personal journey, and I'd love to toss this over to you in a moment, Yemaya, I had a lot of fear around my body and my sexuality because of things that happened to me as a child, and just the overlay of culture. And it wasn't totally safe to be in my sensuality or even in my like normal, free, innocent expression. And I think that's the overlay that most women get, you know, and are taught, don't wear that, don't do that, don't, you know, it's not because our caregivers or the people who love us are trying to shut us down. They're trying to keep us safe. And so for me, I have, you know, as I've gotten more free and more connected to that, and I'm more in my authentic expression, it is really funny to watch people's like reactions. I was just in Greece over the summer, and my sister Summer and I were out dancing, you know, and people were just like, what is happening? But most people were just down there smoking their cigarettes and like barely moving to this like amazing music in this beautiful place. And but learning to be safe in my body. So I would just love to pass this over to you, Yemaya, and can you share what has your journey been to feel safe in your body? Because I know a little bit of your history. I mean, you've gone through some pretty intense trauma as well.
You know, I think a big part of it, and I think it's really missing in our society, is to have a morning practice, not a morning like the beginning of the day, but a morning practice, you know, where you take the time to grieve what was before trauma. There is all kind of way of moving the trauma itself out of the tissue, you know, like yoga, like somatic body work, like dance. But after that, I feel like it's really important to be willing to mourn what came before. And before, usually it's innocence. And there are very specific rituals that you can have to grieve the innocence of the 13 years old that was, you know, violated, or even the baby that was violated. It's like tapping into the willingness to grieve, do the mourning rituals of what was before there was something that made us close and contract. Because I see when I'm working with grief, there is something I call the tainted grief, and there is the pure grief. When you're moving in your life because there's been something that closed you off, a violation of some sort, and you contract your muscles, if it's something around the second chakra, which is your theme today, yeah, you know, people contracting their pelvis, you know, they have a hard time, you know, opening the thighs and feeling into their belly. There is something that's if it's tainted, it's hard to move along. If you have a pure grief, you just grieve. You grieve like a river that's going toward the ocean. But if it's tainted with the guilt, shame, fear, feeling responsible for the disrespect that happened. Are you with me? All these things really be taken one at a time. It's like a bundle of emotions and feelings that are in the psyche and in the body. And it's like dismantling that one at a time and doing the work, the somatic work of each one of those threads. There is guilt because I shouldn't have been in that place. And I went back, you know, whatever we're telling ourselves. Once you're able to grieve all these different aspects, then you get into pure grief, and that moves. And the body gets free. The body doesn't have to hold anymore the shame, those feelings. When we're hurting, usually when there is a positioning in the body, it's because the body is going like, I have something to tell you. You know, when there's a lot of it's like, pay attention to me, because the body, I always say, has only two voices. It's like pain or pleasure. So once we give it the time and take the awareness to do the work and purify so that we can get to that place of a simple mourning, then there is freedom. Then the whole body can breathe. The breath is traveling into these different aspects of the tensions. And, you know, one can be embodied, fully embodied.
Yeah. I think there's a whole dance in learning to recognize and connect with those sensations and like bring ourselves out of freeze, bring ourselves out of numbness. And somebody, another guest speaker had the most beautiful term that she called microdosing pleasure. Because I've gone through so many layers of my pain to be able to be in my pleasure, to be able to feel safe and good, and to, you know, curate and help women and men find that within themselves. But often because we don't have that, we don't feel safe. And I'm curious, I want to pass it over to you, Bhavani, here in a moment. You know, how did you go from what you described as your childhood to really developing a level of safety in your being through yoga? Because I think that is like one of the biggest journeys. And I want to say that the microdosing pleasure was such a great term for me to be like, oh my gosh, because when we're in that state, when there's been trauma, there's been whatever, the deep contraction that happens, it doesn't feel safe to be in pleasure. It feels traumatic, or it feels so vulnerable. to experience pleasure. So to just give yourself like a little bits at a time, helps that imprint that, okay, I am safe. I handled it for a few minutes here. That felt good. I'm good. I didn't die. Nobody hurt me. Nobody did anything. So like that microdosing pleasure. So anyways, I just wanted to share that on this call because I think it's a fabulous thing. And Bhavani, what's been your experience? Like, how did you find your way into that safety?
Well, I think what I'd like to preface is that we tend to romanticize the spiritual path. And, even our ideas of like pleasure, this is where, like joy, our ideas of joy, it may not be doing scissor kicks across the dance floor. And, and I see this is pandemic as well, the spiritual bypass, where we're using metaphysical practices to evade our human experience and even our feelings, where we don't give our feelings and our longing the respect that they're due. Now, there's always the extremes, which is there's also it's become very hip to obsess over our injuries and the dramatic aspect, and I think, this is where it's like, this isn't about shaming or blaming, but just, again, feeling your wholeness in that, and that, not always insisting that you feel good. This is the way that in the sutras, it's called parinama, which is it's like a compressive force of evolution. And this is relationships, like, oh, I've met the perfect guy. And, they've done research that, most relationships the honeymoon is over within 3 months, max a year and a half. So our rough edges are going to bump up against each other. And love is, from the yogic perspective, it's so much more than a human emotion. It's a field of resonance. It's our willingness to grow, to learn, so for me, it's more, I look at the word santosha, which says there's a sutra, santosha nukama sukha. Even better than happiness, which comes from the outside in, is santosha, which is a feeling of contentment. And being a linguist daughter, I looked up the word contentment, and it's a feeling of satisfaction that you're doing your work. So you're paying attention and like, okay, am I, do I have a romantic idea of this person? Am I lingering in my wound? When I'm moving from my wound, what I'm doing, and there's lots of research on this with polyvagal theory, I'm triggering the wound in somebody else. But when I speak to my wound, I speak to the wholeness. And that can be really, really scary. So, I really feel like, as much as the somatics, they're an imperative. And that's where psychotherapy is starting to interface beautifully with somatics and their somatic practices. We need both. And we need, and what I also really see is the aspect of inertia. And for a lot of people, at least on this island, the inertia is they don't slow down. Being able to sit with yourself. And sometimes in that sitting with yourself, it's like you're frustrated and you think, I'm going to meditate. And then you sit in your anger. And then, the trauma pathways, they're like 60% stronger than the other pathways. There's very interesting research at Harvard, which has been able to matriculate that we have 80,000 thoughts per day. 95% of those thoughts, this is in an unexamined psyche, 95% of those thoughts are repeating and 80% are self-negating. So then I know it's like, oh my God, and so it's personal to us, but it's more than that. And really getting in touch with I want to feel my wholeness. And so then there's the grieving, you know, there's the anger of feeling victimized. And then if you can sit long enough with that anger, and you have to feel it, you know, but what do we usually do with anger is offload it onto others. So there's also research that you can't be angry in shoulder stand. There's not enough neural bandwidth. You know, this is where we can use practice. I mean, I've got books this thick on it of the neuroscience, the talking therapy. And then we get to the layer of grief, because behind the anger, if we can slow down enough to feel the feels, because, you know, we all have basic emotions. There's this psychiatrist who was a professor, and he was able to determine that we all have 7 basic emotions, even single-celled amoebas. And one of them is anger, and one of them is fear. You know, this is information that's showing us that something's missing. This is just biologically encoded. So, like, what can I give myself? How can I give this to myself? How can I speak to others and be transparent and honest and say, like, this is what I'm feeling. Is this just the story in my head? Or what's, you know, learning how to talk about these things. You know, so behind sitting with that grief, and it's often that loss of the innocence. And then behind that is the longing. And that longing is what keeps us growing and kind of like molting out of the, you know, if there's 2 things we need to be aware of, it's being callous and indifferent. So I believe, you know, as you know, heal thyself, and being on the path of the tender-hearted warrior, that we also have to retain the capacity to be wounded. We're not always, you know, there's going to be disappointments, but what are we going to do with this? And, you know, there's our ideas, but then there's magic. Like, so in the sutras, it says, like, instead of meditating on the seed, meditate on the womb. And it's called Hridaya Garbha, which is the golden womb of creation, that there's grace. And this oftentimes that grace comes in when you're just like, I can't do this anymore. I don't have any more compassion for myself or for others. I don't have patience. And then there's like a loosening in this idea, this terrible idea that we should have it all together. And to be like, you know, like when the soul speaks, you know, it's like putting your hand in compost. It's hot and it's like full of textures and it has all these smells, and the body speaks in full shivers. And in that space of like, you know, there's something bigger than me that is moving through me, and I can offer to life's beauty making as something never before seen. Then, you know, then there's kind of like a trust that develops in not knowing, but that takes time, right? You know, and that's really the journey is, you know, everybody just wants a meme or a course, or like touch me on the third eye, or give me a mantra. I've had people say, is there a mantra to heal my relationship with my father? And I'm like, yeah, go to therapy. That's your mantra, you know, do the yoga, but like also work with somebody so that you can see where this is just a repeating thought, what's actually like vital, what is actually real versus what is just a neuroses that is breaking you down and disintegrating you. So I don't know if I answered your question, but, you know, that's, you know, and that's for me, the reframing of like contentment is knowing I don't have it all together and life is growing me into something beautiful, never before seen. I've never seen it. And that I can trust myself, and also getting intimate enough to know when I have overreaching ideals, which basically don't, you know, these ideas of perfectionism, which don't allow me to feel my own unique beauty that's unfolding.
Mm. So much background, Bhavani. Oh, yeah. Okay. So I would like to bring this into the theme or what we talked about today in our session around Kundalini energy, around our sacred sexuality, and just really actually kind of, I gave an overlay of our anatomy and how it's all intertwined and like the energy, because it's something I think we're so under educated about. And we come into this vast, vital world of our sexuality just in a miss, most of us, not educated, trauma in this world where it's like fear-based, or we're over-sexualized, or we're hiding from it, or whatever these themes are. So I'm just curious, Yemaya, if you can share a little bit about your journey around your sexuality and how the embodiment work and practices that you have done have served you in finding that wholeness with yourself.
Well, I wasn't really going there just now, but I'll try. I have this card that I wanted to share today because I love to pick up cards for calls with my student, and it's Akilonda, the goddess of never not broken. Never not broken. Everything happens for my liberation. I choose to become only more love. And I just felt like that was, as what Bhavani was sharing, felt like it was reflection, and especially around, also trusting in the unknown, which is very womb based, right? So it's like that womb, that ocean of not knowing, like you said, Bhavani, something that grows. And I think, that's the only way we can live a whole life. A life of wholeness is being, able to go, whoop, I take my hands off this, I offer it up, and I'm trusting my womb, and I'm trusting this mystery of creation. So, your question about sexuality is, these past few years I've been all about speaking about heart and grief and not very much about sexuality. So it's like, okay, what do I have to say around that?
What feels comfortable for you to share?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I was introduced very early on as a young Parisian to Osho by an older lover. And so, different, like more like white tantra practices that were very, beautiful. I was never, well, that's not true. See, it's like we forget those things. I was never sexually violated. Wrong. Yeah, you remember when you were raped when you were like 20 on the Champs-Elysees? Oh, no, I don't. It's so amazing. Some of those memories we just like, what's like, but I feel like, for me, my pain was more around the heart than sexuality, than having to heal my sexuality. I feel like I've more or less always had a very healthy sexuality. And being introduced to Osho so early, it was all about, having the orgasm being orgasmically global, universal, making love with the universe. So pretty early on, that was my goal, okay, I'm making love with the universe, here we go. So that's Kundalini rising, that's, going through each chakra, letting them pass through. I always love this, my understanding, and Bhavani, you might know much more on that, but, my physical yoga practice is very minimal these days because of injuring my spine really bad. I still do yoga twice a week, but pranayamas are really my thing. And I couldn't move through a day without having my pranayamas before I do anything, to bring me into my center and into my aliveness. But the chakra journey, the healing of the chakra and having the Kundalini rise up, I always love to know that until you pierce Anya chakra, the third eye, it's coming back. It's coming back down. So it's up and down until boom, you pierce it, and then cha, you came to your enlightened journey, which, is not one of my aspiration anymore in this lifetime. I gave that one up when I was younger. It's like, I'll be happy with santosha, contentment, a good life, I am not running after enlightenment.
Yeah. All right. Thank you for sharing that. And what you shared before. There's just so much nectar, I think, in our pain as well, and being able to hold and be with both of that. I know that that's been the doorway for me through healing a lot of or transforming, I should say, a lot of what I held around my sexuality, or where I held myself back in my sexuality and many other layers. Could you speak, Bhavani, to what you know or what you have to add to this conversation around energy and Kundalini, or anything from your experience, anything that's alive for you? Just hand it over.
Well, I think it's about semantics, and we use a lot of terms kind of generally. So what I'm going to offer is contrast, and it's not in any way meant to, disqualify what's being shared. But as far as what I understand, you don't want to awaken your Kundalini. You want, and when you look at more tantric books, and I'm talking about deeper tantra, you want to have, and I think you put it really well, Yemaya, you want to have the capacity for movement, not having it all up here. And that Kundalini, Kunda means a coil, and it's feminine. And I remember learning all these pranayama practices. We would take lotus, Shakta, probably we would take lotus, do Vastrika breath, intense breath, a retention, pick ourselves up and pound the root chakra on the ground and try to raise it. What happens, and there's lots of literature on this from, when Kundalini awakens in that way, you don't sleep, the body, the nervous system's on fire, you hear conversations from 2 miles away, you're so psychic that basically you kind of got to go live in a cave somewhere. So, I think we have to, so just saying that, I think it's about having access to Kundalini and being able to, full body. To me, spirituality, and I think BKS Iyengar, surprisingly, because he was kind of militant and abusive, but he did nail it. I don't want to discredit it. What does spirituality mean? People talk about it all the time. And he says you need to penetrate your cells with awareness, your nervous system, your heart, and your mind. Until you, and the mind meaning the conscious, the subconscious, the collective subconscious, the collective super consciousness. So again, it's about developing intimacy and capacity for transmission. Then you're moving from your wholeness. It's not just about living up here. It's about being able to connect very much top to bottom. So the way that, interestingly enough, the way that I'm, I'm also, and this is a natural progression. It even says it in the sutra, it's a tatsmin sata shvasa prashvasa yorgati vicheta pranayamaha. The function of the physical practices of asana is to make a container that is resilient and responsive enough to feel the movement of prana. And prana isn't just breath. The way we experience, the way we do pranayama is we experience sensation. So where am I numb? Where am I disconnected? So I'm very much more breath-based, and I've been really fascinated with the pelvic floor lately. And this is where, if you look at like Stephen Porges, and all the trauma research and polyvagal theory, that's where we hold trauma. And most people's pelvic floor is dead. Even these ideas around mula bandha. And you can see people, and it's like, they're anally retentive. And you can see a lot of yoga practitioners, and they look dehydrated. And even though it's this idea of the body beautiful and they're sinewy and muscly, maybe they speak beautifully in a class, but like, is there communion? Is there connection? And so I've been really working with myself for the past few years, instead of saying, I think, saying, I feel. Or when I'm sitting with somebody, listening with my whole body. When you spoke to me, I felt that in my gut. I felt that in my heart. And so really appreciating, even this idea around contraction, like you said, Yemaya, in the methodology that you're using, sometimes we can use contraction to create release. I love what Rumi says: if your hand was always closed in a fist or always open, you'd be paralyzed. So to feel that there's a fluidity, and that to me is Kundalini awakening. I don't know what that I want. I don't want to get it stuck up here. I don't want to get stuck anywhere. And so that's what's really interesting to me. And sometimes you might even want to do this, and you maybe already are doing it, but is having people write their name with their tailbone. And I remember reading that in one of these kind of more Western tantric books, as far as like pleasuring a woman. If you don't know what to do, write the alphabet with your tongue. Do it backwards. You know what I mean? But even something like that, and then feeling transmission in your body. That was one of the great things of growing up on the South Side of Chicago. It was like in the hood, you would see people walk down the street and they'd be walking, there'd be swag. And you can see where people, where there isn't transmission in the body. So yeah, I think that's what's really, it's like, okay, there's the more you understand the metaphysical practices, and there's study and research on this too. You got to spend 7 years like learning the technology of anything, whether you're a dancer, a pianist, a writer, a scientist. You got to learn the chops. And then once you do that, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi wrote this book called Flow. And he says, then it gets to a point where it's so in your nervous system that you don't have enough bandwidth to be aware that you're doing. This is when the surfer becomes one with the wave, or the dancer becomes one with the music. And this is when like genius is moving through you. Oh, I'm getting chicken skin, right? Like there's authentic creativity. And that's the way I like to explore yoga. Like, okay, we're going to understand these actions to create transmission. It's not for the sake of the pose. It's to hold ourselves. Then once you know it, then throw it away. And that's what it says in the sutras, that this was life-changing. And I learned this at 24, like the whole purpose of your life and your incarnation is Bhog Aparvarga, to have enough freedom to be able to experience the fullness of self and life without getting hooked anywhere. And so you're not going to feel the pleasure unless you touch the longing and the grief and the anger. And that I'm not a Hindu, but going to India so much, it's like that each of these things, there's a deity for all of these. There's the anger that has purpose for healing. And, there's so much oh, wow, you're really angry. It's like, no, that there's longing behind it. And in the end, that sole purpose is getting freed up to experience love as a field of resonance and communion.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Thank you, both of you. This has been so rich and so deep, and we could just go on and on and on and on. I would love to just have you each just share if there's one last thing that you just really feel alive that you want to share as we close this, and then how people can get in contact with you, and if you have anything, an offering that you want to offer up at this time?
I think I'll piggyback on the last bit of Bhavani about like being a channel, right? It's like you just like take me over. I'm just an open channel. Take me over, and in that work there is that reconciliation with source, which I feel like is the ultimate, and sometimes needs work because sometimes we have felt abandoned by source, by the mother, and that very much lives also around the navel, right? So yeah, take me over. Hands in the air. Let's see. People can find me at theembrace.life. That's my website, theembrace.life. I do have something. I have a free event coming next weekend called Initiation, and it's turning hardship into the awakening toward our freedom, our purpose, and our wholeness. And that's an intro class for the gift of grief. And that's coming for the winter, the gift of grief. So alchemy, a lot of alchemy. Bhavani, I love listening to you. Oh my God, I've missed you.
I know.
I miss you too. I'm so inspired by your presence, and maybe we can just all have tea together because it feels so good.
So good. Yes, let's do that. All right, Bhavani, you share any last thoughts and what's alive? How can people get in contact with you?
I think it's really helpful, and I do use a lot of science and physiology and current research along with these really indigenous practices with chanting the sutras. I offer trainings, immersions online and in person on Kauai, and I teach a lot on the mainland, workshops. Probably, my favorite offering that I do is this Yoga Sutra mentorship. And we meet once a week on Wednesdays. I have people all over the world, and it's 1 hour. I pack a sutra, not for the sake of the sutra, but really that yoga is a process of self-inquiry. And it's not even about the answer, but it's about the discovery. And there's just been beautiful bonds and connections that have formed with that. And some of the students I've just met for the first time after years. And it was like, we got to embrace, and yet we felt so intimate. So I offer that. I also have a student who's recently invited me to put out a podcast. So if you want to get my book, it's called The Yogi's Roadmap. I have a kind of dilapidated copy here. And the podcast is eponymous. So I'm definitely available. There's a YouTube channel and all of that. If what I'm sharing with you gets the juices flowing. And I would say that, the first sutra really puts it beautiful. Hatha yoga nushasanam. Right here, right now, where you are. You have everything you need to extract the juice from life. And then to pull from the neuroscience, of our tendency for problem addiction. That's how we're wired. That what you think is wrong about you is actually what's right. We all are going to pass through thresholds at different times. We're here to be pierced by life. And it's this, it's the hero's journey. We all have to kind of make some kind of a journey, whether we go up to some, mountain peak or into the unearthing process or through the dark forest, to come back to our own wholeness. So to be patient is, to just know that you're something that's never been before seen. That there's beauty coming through you, and it ain't always pretty, but that there are other people there. And when you really get in touch with that raw longing, you're going to find those people, and you're going to find your family. As I'm sitting here with mine, so much love and so much respect for the work that you women are doing in the world. It really makes my heart full.
Right back at you, Bhavani, just such a beautiful mentor, woman, mother, sister, a human being. So, and Yemaya, thank you both so much for sharing your wisdom, for sharing your energy, for gifting these women with all that you have, all that you're sharing here and you've transpired in your own life. So thank you. And I look forward to more, please.
I want to honor you, Ashley, for the work you're doing right now. And I hear so much good things in our community about people that work with you. And it's such a crucial time. And speaking of resonance, it's like just being in your field. I always feel like, I'm being nurtured by you. Thank you so much.
Ditto. Thank you, ladies. Thank you, everybody. Mwah. Aloha.
Aloha. Namaskara.
Namaskara.